The smell of garlic and ginger filled the air as I stood in my family's kitchen, my hands trembling as I gripped the acceptance letter. Around me, the usual chaos of dinner service continued, line cooks shouting orders, plates clattering, the sizzle of woks on high heat. But all I could focus on was my father's reddening face as he read the words that would change everything. Culinary Institute of America, he spat, crumpling the letter in his fist. You want to abandon the family business for some fancy cooking school. My name is Michael Chen, and at 18, I was about to disappoint 3 generations of family tradition. The Golden Dragon restaurant chain had been our family's pride for over 50 years, growing from my grandfather's single storefront to my father's empire of 30 restaurants across the West Coast. Every Chen had worked their way up through the kitchen, learning our family's closely guarded recipes and management style. It wasn't just a business, it was our legacy. Dad, please, I said, trying to keep my voice steady despite the chaos around us. This is an opportunity to learn new techniques to bring fresh ideas back to the business. Fresh ideas? He threw the crumpled letter at my feet. You think our traditional recipes, the ones your grandfather perfected, aren't good enough? You think you know better than 50 years of success? My mother stood in the corner, wringing her hands in her apron. James, she said softly to my father, maybe we should listen. No. He slammed his hand on the steel prep table, making the utensils rattle. There's nothing to discuss. Michael will take his place in the kitchen, learning the business from the ground up, just like I did, just like his grandfather did. I took a deep breath, steeling myself for what I had to say next. I've already accepted. Classes start next month. The kitchen fell silent. Even the line cooks stopped what they were doing, watching the drama unfold. My father's face went from red to purple. You what? I got a scholarship, I continued, forcing the words out. It covers most of the tuition. This is my chance to learn from the best chefs in the world, to understand different cuisines, different business models. Business models? He laughed, but there was no humor in it. You think some school can teach you more about running restaurants in your own family than 50 years of real-world experience? That's not what I... No, I know exactly what you mean, he cut me off. You're ashamed of us, ashamed of your heritage. You want to go learn fancy French techniques and forget everything your grandfather built. Dad, that's not true. I want to honor our heritage by throwing it away. He stepped closer, his voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. By spitting on everything we've worked for. I stood my ground even as my heart raced. The restaurant industry is changing, Dad. We need to adapt to grow. I want to learn how to. Get out. The words hit me like a physical blow. What? If you won't take your place in this family, in this business, then you're not welcome here. Get out. My mother gasped. James, no. Stay out of this, May, he snapped, not taking his eyes off me. He made his choice. He wants to abandon his family. Fine, but he does it with nothing. I felt the blood drain from my face. Dad, please. You have 10 minutes to pack whatever you can carry. Then I never want to see you in any of my restaurants again. My mother started crying, but she didn't move to stop him. She never did. My father's word was law in our family, just like his father's had been before him. I looked around the kitchen, at the woks I'd learned to season when I was 12, the prep station where I'd spent countless hours chopping vegetables, the secret recipe book chained to the wall that contained 3 generations of family dishes. This had been my whole world for 18 years. But I couldn't stay. Not if it meant giving up my dreams. I turned and walked out of the kitchen, heading upstairs to the small apartment above the restaurant where we lived. In my room, I grabbed my backpack, stuffing it with some clothes, my laptop, and the small amount of cash I'd saved from working in the kitchen, about $200. When I came back down, my father was waiting by the back door. Your key, he said, holding out his hand. I placed the restaurant key in his palm, our fingers not touching. For a moment, I thought I saw something flicker in his eyes, regret maybe, or sadness. But then it was gone, replaced by cold anger. You're making a mistake, he said. Out there, you're nothing. No one. Here, you could have had everything. I shouldered my backpack, looking him in the eye. No, Dad. Here, I could only ever be what you wanted me to be. He opened the door, the night air rushing in, carrying with it the sounds of the city. Go, he said simply. I walked past him, out into the alley behind the restaurant. The door closed behind me with a final sounding click. I stood there for a moment, letting the reality of my situation sink in. 18 years old, kicked out of my home, with nothing but a backpack and $200 to my name. Most people would have been terrified. But standing there, breathing in the mix of city air and restaurant exhaust, I felt something unexpected. Freedom. I pulled out my phone and called the one person I knew would understand. David? Yeah, it happened. Can I crash on your couch for a few days? David Wong had been my best friend since middle school. And more importantly, he knew what it was like to disappoint your family. He chose an art school over his parents' medical practice dreams. Stay as long as you need, he said without hesitation. We outcasts have to stick together. As I walked to the bus stop, I passed by the front of Golden Dragon. Through the window, I could see the usual busy dinner service. Customers enjoying my grandfather's recipes, servers rushing between tables, the familiar choreography of a successful restaurant. One day, I whispered to myself, I'll build something even better. Something that honors our heritage while embracing the future, and I'll do it my way. I had no idea then how true those words would prove to be, or how the next 10 years would shape not just my future, but the future of my family's legacy. All I knew was that I was finally free to chase my dreams, even if it meant starting from nothing. The bus arrived, its doors hissing open. I took one last look at Golden Dragon, at the golden characters that had been my family's pride for half a century, then stepped onto the bus and into my new life. I had no way of knowing then that this moment, this terrifying, liberating moment, would be the first step toward building something that would change everything. But that's getting ahead of the story. First, I had to survive culinary school with nothing but $200 and a dream. The first year was harder than I could have imagined. Living on David's couch while attending culinary school meant sleeping in 3-hour bursts between his art projects and my late-night study sessions. I picked up work at a local diner, washing dishes and doing prep work for barely above minimum wage. Every penny went toward my portion of the rent and the part of tuition my scholarship didn't cover. But I was learning, not just about cooking, though the techniques I was mastering went far beyond anything my father had taught me, but about business, about innovation, about how to honor tradition while embracing change. You're different from the other students, Chef Marcus, my favorite instructor, told me one day after class. I had stayed late, experimenting with a fusion dish that combined my family's traditional Sichuan techniques with modern French presentation. How so? I asked, carefully plating the dish I'd been working on. He picked up a fork, tasting the sauce. Most students here are chasing trends, trying to be the next celebrity chef. But you understand that great cuisine is about bridging gaps, connecting past and future. His words stayed with me, especially during the tough times. And there were plenty of those. One night, about 6 months into my first year, I was closing up at the diner when I saw a familiar face through the window, my mother. She was standing in the rain, clutching her purse, looking uncertain. I let her in, my heart pounding. Mom, what are you doing here? She looked around the empty diner, taking in the worn booths and flickering fluorescent lights, so different from the polished ambience of Golden Dragon. I had to see you, she said softly. Your father, he doesn't know I'm here. We sat in a booth, the rain pattering against the windows. She looked older than I remembered, more tired. How did you find me? David's mother told me where you were working. She reached across the table, then stopped herself. Are you okay? I thought about lying, about telling her everything was great, but I couldn't. It's hard, I admitted. But I'm learning so much, Mom. Not just about cooking, but about running a real modern restaurant, about combining tradition with innovation. She nodded slowly. Your father won't admit it, but business is down. The new fusion places downtown are drawing away our younger customers. He keeps saying they'll come back, that true Chinese cuisine will never go out of style. But I wanted to tell her about my ideas, about how Golden Dragon could adapt without losing its soul. But I knew it wouldn't matter. My father would never listen. I brought you something, she said, reaching into her purse. She pulled out a small, worn notebook. My grandfather's recipe book, not the official one chained to the wall at Golden Dragon, but his personal notebook, where he'd written his real secrets. Mom, I can't take this, I said, even as my hands reached for it. Your grandfather gave this to me before he passed. she said, pressing it into my hands. He always said the future belongs to those who can learn from the past without being trapped by it. I think he would have understood what you're trying to do. I opened the notebook carefully. Inside, in my grandfather's precise handwriting, were not just recipes, but his thoughts on cooking, on business, on life. Notes about how he'd adapted his hometown dishes for American palates without losing their authenticity. Ideas for changes he'd wanted to make but never got the chance to. Your father doesn't know I have this, she said, standing up. Please, use it well. Before I could respond, she hurried out into the rain. It was the last time I would see her for many years. That notebook became my blueprint, not just for cooking, but for the future I wanted to build. My grandfather had been an innovator in his time, even if my father had forgotten that. The years passed in a blur of classes, work, and endless planning. I graduated from CIA with honors, but instead of taking offers from prestigious restaurants, I stayed at the diner. The owner, Mr. Patterson, was getting older and had no one to take over. Kid, he said one day, you're too good for this place. Why are you still here? I showed him my business plan, a one I've been working on for 2 years. A new kind of restaurant, one that would combine traditional Chinese techniques with modern American farm-to-table philosophy. Not fusion for fusion's sake, but thoughtful integration of old and new. I need to learn everything about running a restaurant, I told him. Not just the kitchen, but the books, the suppliers, the staff management. Everything. He looked at me for a long moment, then smiled. Tell you what, help me run this place for 2 more years. I'll teach you everything I know about the business side, and I'll sell it to you for a fair price when I retire. It was more than fair. It was exactly what I needed. Over the next 2 years, I learned more about running a restaurant than I ever could have in school. Mr. Patterson taught me about negotiating with suppliers, managing cash flow, and handling difficult customers. Meanwhile, I experimented with the menu, slowly introducing specials that combined my classical training with my grandfather's techniques. The diner's regulars, who had initially been skeptical, became our biggest supporters. This is different, one longtime customer told me after trying my mapo tofu meatloaf. But somehow, it feels right. By the time Mr. Patterson was ready to retire, I had saved enough for a down payment. David, who had become a successful graphic designer, helped me with the branding. We transformed the old diner into something new. Heritage Kitchen. The concept was simple but revolutionary, traditional Chinese techniques and flavors applied to American comfort food, and vice versa. Every dish told a story of cultural exchange, of respect for both tradition and innovation. We opened quietly, without any publicity, but word spread quickly. Food bloggers discovered us. Local newspapers wrote reviews. Soon we had lines out the door. You need to expand, David told me one night as we sat in the empty restaurant after closing. This is bigger than one location. He was right. Within 3 years, we had opened 3 more heritage kitchens across the city. Each one was profitable, each one maintained our high standards, and each one helped tell our story of bridging culinary traditions. I was careful about growth, remembering the lessons from both my father and Mr. Patterson. Each new location had to feel personal, had to maintain the quality and spirit of the original. We weren't just selling food, we were sharing a philosophy. Then came the offer that would change everything. A restaurant group wanted to invest, to help us expand nationally. The numbers they offered were staggering, but what really caught my attention was their approach. We don't want to change what you're doing, their CEO said. We want to help you do it on a bigger scale, while maintaining your values. I thought about it for a long time. This was a chance to prove that my vision could work beyond just our city. But it was also risky, exactly the kind of rapid expansion that had led many restaurant chains to lose their soul. In the end, I agreed, but with conditions. I would maintain creative control. Each new location would have extensive training in both technique and philosophy. We would grow only as fast as we could maintain quality. They agreed to everything. Within 5 years, Heritage Kitchen had grown to 50 locations across the country. Each one was successful, each one maintained our standards, and each one helped spread our message about the power of respectful cultural exchange through food. I was 32 years old, and I had built something I was truly proud of. Something that honored my heritage while embracing change. Something that would have made my grandfather proud. Then came the news that would bring everything full circle. Golden Dragon was failing. The news came through David, who still had connections in the Chinese restaurant community. Golden Dragon, once the pride of the West Coast, was struggling. Their revenues had been declining for years, and now they were facing bankruptcy. "They're looking for buyers," David said, showing me the listing. "Your father is finally willing to sell." I sat in my office at Heritage Kitchen's headquarters, looking at the financial reports for Golden Dragon. The numbers told a clear story: declining sales, rising costs, failure to adapt to changing tastes. My father had stuck to his guns, refusing to change anything, and now he was paying the price. "What are you thinking?" David asked, knowing that look in my eye. I closed my laptop. "I'm thinking it's time to go home." The next day, I had my CFO set up a holding company to make an offer on Golden Dragon. I kept my name out of it. I wanted to see how things played out first. The offer we made was fair, more than fair actually, given the state of the business. 3 days later, I walked into Golden Dragon for the first time in 15 years. The first thing that hit me was how little had changed. The same red and gold decorations, now faded with age. The same tables, showing years of wear. Even the menu looked identical, though the prices had gone up. My father sat at his usual table in the corner, looking much older than I remembered. My mother sat beside him, her hair now completely gray. They were meeting with someone I assumed was their lawyer. I approached slowly, hearing snippets of their conversation. "The offer is very generous," the lawyer was saying. "Given the current situation, I recommend." "Michael?" My mother's voice, soft with disbelief, cut through the conversation. My father's head snapped up, his eyes widening as he recognized me. "Hello," I said simply, standing before their table. "It's been a while." My father's face hardened. "What are you doing here? Come to gloat?" "No," I said, pulling up a chair. "I came to talk about the future of Golden Dragon." The lawyer looked confused. "I'm sorry, who are you?" "He's nobody," my father snapped. "Just my failure of a son who abandoned his family." I kept my voice calm. "Actually, I'm the CEO of Heritage Kitchen, and I'm the one making the offer to buy Golden Dragon." The silence that followed was, "These are beautiful," she whispered. "The offer we made," I continued, "isn't just about buying Golden Dragon. It's about preserving it. I want to create a Heritage Kitchen flagship location here, one that showcases both our innovation and our history. The Golden Dragon name, its heritage, would be celebrated, not erased." "And what about me?" my father asked, quietly deepening. My father's face went through a range of emotions: shock, disbelief, anger, and finally, something that looked like fear. "Heritage Kitchen." The lawyer's eyes widened. "The national chain that's been revolutionizing Chinese American cuisine?" My father looked like he'd been slapped. He'd been so focused on maintaining his idea of tradition that he hadn't even noticed who his biggest competitor had become. "Impossible," he whispered. You were nothing. You had nothing." "I had everything I needed," I said, pulling out my grandfather's notebook. "I had his wisdom and the courage to use it." My mother's eyes filled with tears when she saw the notebook. My father just stared at it. "Your grandfather would be ashamed," he said, but his voice lacked conviction. "We stayed true to his vision." I opened the notebook to a page I'd memorized years ago. Grandfather wrote, "A tree that cannot bend in the wind will break. Our cuisine must grow like a living thing, adapting while keeping its roots strong." I looked at my father. "You forgot that part of his legacy." "And you?" he demanded. "What have you done with his legacy? Created some trendy fusion food that betrays everything we stood for." I pulled out my phone, showing him pictures of Heritage Kitchen's dishes. Every dish we serve honors our traditions while embracing change. We use grandfather's techniques, his understanding of flavor and balance, but we apply them in new ways. We're not betraying his legacy, we're helping it evolve. My mother reached for the phone, scrolling through the pictures. "That depends on you," I replied. "You can stay on as a consultant, helping us maintain the traditional dishes that made Golden Dragon famous. Or you can take the money and retire. The choice is yours." He was quiet for a long time, looking around the restaurant he'd given his life to. Finally, he spoke. "Your grandfather, he used to fight with me too. About changing things. I thought I was protecting his legacy by keeping everything the same. But you understood something I didn't." "It's not too late," I said softly. "We can work together. Combine your experience with our innovation. Make something even better. My father looked at me, really looked at me, for the first time in 15 years. Show me, he said finally. Show me what you want to do with his legacy. Over the next few hours, I laid out my vision for the new Golden Dragon Heritage Kitchen. How we would preserve the best of the past while building something new. How we would honor both our heritage and our future. My mother cried when I showed her the designs, which incorporated elements from the original Golden Dragon into our modern aesthetic. Even my father seemed moved, though he tried to hide it. You did good, son, he said finally, his voice rough with emotion. Your grandfather, he would have been proud. The transformation took 6 months. We closed Golden Dragon for renovations, but we kept all the staff, training them in our techniques while learning from their experience. My father, to everyone's surprise, threw himself into the project, sharing stories and recipes I'd never heard before. When we reopened, the line stretched around the block. Food critics raved about how we'd managed to preserve the soul of a classic while bringing it into the modern era. But the real victory came during our family dinner before the official opening. We sat at a table, my father, my mother, David, and me, sharing dishes that bridged the gap between past and present. My father tried my mapo tofu meatloaf, the dish that had first put Heritage Kitchen on the map. This is different, he said after the first bite. Then he smiled, really smiled for the first time in years. But somehow, it feels right. My mother reached across the table and squeezed my hand. Your grandfather used to say that the best meals bring people together, she said softly. I think we finally understood what he meant. Looking around the restaurant, at the subtle blend of old and new, at the happy staff preparing for opening night, at my family finally reunited, I felt a deep sense of peace. We had managed to save not just a restaurant, but a legacy, and we had done it by understanding that true tradition isn't about staying the same. It's about keeping your roots strong while allowing your branches to grow in new directions. Today, Golden Dragon Heritage Kitchen is our flagship location, a symbol of how honoring the past and embracing the future don't have to be mutually exclusive. My father still comes in every day, sharing stories with customers about how his father started it all with just a wok and a dream. And in the kitchen, alongside our state-of-the-art equipment, my grandfather's notebook sits in a place of honor, its pages still offering wisdom to new generations of chefs who understand that the best traditions are the ones that know how to grow. Sometimes, late at night after the restaurant closes, I sit at that same corner table where everything changed. I think about that scared 18-year-old kid who left with nothing but a backpack and a dream. I think about all the lessons learned, all the bridges built, all the traditions honored and renewed. And I realize that sometimes walking away isn't about leaving something behind. It's about finding a new way to carry it forward.